Hey guys, welcome to 1.3 lists. So lists are basically awesome, and you are going to learn a new powerful way of the force, which is lists. Lists are a container style data type, like integers or strings. Right? But in this case, lists just hold a whole pile of things called elements. And really, just like a string, we can refer to each thing in a list by index. So here's some examples. All right, so here we have a list of integers, 2, 4, 6, 8. Now, first thing you should notice is that a list has these square brackets around it in each case, right? So this is how you type a list in Python. Here's one with strings, right? It's got 4 strings in it. Each one has a comma in between, just like before. And here we have some floats, right? A list of floats, 1, 2, 3. And of course, here is a list with mixed data types, right? So we have 3, high, and 2.5, integer, string, and float. Okay, the next one is a list of 3 variables, right here. Notice when you just type just plain old text, that means that it must contain something, otherwise there will be a name error. So this would be a list of 3 unknown data types, whatever those things contain. You could also make a list of lists, right? So if you can notice here, we have a square bracket here and another one here that's closing it. And within that, there are 3 elements that also are lists, which contain the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we'll be working with those eventually. This is called a 2-dimensional list. Super cool. Okay, so how do we refer to lists by index? So the way you do it is just like a string. So you can use a positive index, like a string. The very first item in a list has index 0. And then every subsequent item has an index that is 1 greater. Or you can use negative indexes. Okay, and just like a string, you can refer to the last item or the rightmost item in a list using index -1. And then moving left toward the front, you get -2, -3, and so forth. So let's do this example here in the terminal. We'll just start the terminal and start that up with me. And what we'll do is we'll create this list here, my list, and we'll set it to 3 things, cat, dog, and bird. So we'll type my list equals, and you type your square bracket, and now we'll type our string cat, string dog, and string bird. And make sure you put a comma in between those right in the middle there, of course. Right? Press enter, and if you've done it right, it should give you no complaints. Now let's see what each of these things are. We're going to type each of these in and see what we get. So the first one, my list. Now if we put square bracket in here, this means this is different. You've never seen this before. This is not like a function where we put round brackets, right? A square bracket means give me the thing inside my list at index 0. Okay, so this means look inside whatever this thing contains. Okay, so index 0, and we get cat. Okay, so it's printing the first index in my list, right? The first thing, I should say, at index 0. If we type my list 1, this is at index 1 is dog, and so we should see dog, right? And so forth. My list 2 gives us bird. Okay, and we can also use these negative indices, right? Like I mentioned, so my list -1, this gives us bird, right? That's the rightmost. And now we can we can work across to the left to dog by typing -2. And -3 then would be cat, right? So just like a string, you can refer to each thing in a list by index. So let's say we want to change a list item. Well, let's change cat to Tyrannosaurus, right? So what you can literally do is just set my list and then say the index you want to change, and set that equal to the new string you want. So we can type my list and put a 0 in there, and that will be equal to type a quote, right? Tyrannosaurus, right? And that's going to change that first one. So let's type my list and we'll see what we get. And so now, right, it's going to print the list. By the way, if you just type the name of the variable in a terminal, if it contains a list, it will print that for you. Of course, in your code, you're going to have to use a print statement to get that, right? If you print a list, that's what you're going to see, right? If you type print mylist in your code, you'll see that with the brackets and everything inside. Okay, and so now this is basically how you can change a list by index. So this is very handy. So lists are created just like any other variable with an assignment statement. And you can create them with contents or without contents. All right, and you can see here I have two examples. You can create my list as an empty list. Right, so if we type my list equals and just put empty brackets, empty square brackets, then it's going to be empty. So right, and we're going to get nothing in there. But you can also create it with elements like this, like we did before, right? When we set my list to cat, dog, and bird, or in this case 1, 2, and 3, and then it would come with elements that you could work with. Another thing you can do here is add elements to a list. Because you might remember here we changed an element, but what if we wanted to add one to this, right? Well, let's try this again here. Just going to delete this. Didn't know why that's in there. So the append method is what we use for this, and the append is a list method, right? So this can be used whenever you have a list object. You can attach this to the end of it, and whatever x is will get added to the list, whatever you put in the brackets here. So let's do this example here where we'll set my list to nothing, which we've already done, and then we'll append the number 10. So we can type my list dot append and then 10, and that will, if we type my list again, then add something. It will add 10 to our list. Okay, let's add another thing. We'll add 1,000, the string. So my list dot append, and we'll type in 1,000 in quotes. And let's now see it. All right, so now we have 10 and the string 1,000 after that, and so forth, right? We could add this number pi, this float, mylist dot append 3.14, right? We could add that, and then we would have a third element in the list. And it's really that simple. But what if we wanted to add a whole pile of things to a list? Well, let's try this example 3. Write a program to create and display a list with 100 elements from 1 to 100. So here's the solution, but give this a try before you copy this mindlessly. I'll scroll up here, pause the video for a minute, and see if you can do it. All right, so welcome back. Maybe you had to try that and got it. But if you didn't, well, let's do this together. So we'll call this example 3. Creating a 100 element list. So first thing, of course, we need to do is create a little list variable that's going to contain our empty list, because we're going to add a whole pile of items to this. And just going off this master I have over here, what we could do then is just use a little for loop that will take us through a whole pile of numbers, because this range object, remember these range objects, how they work? They contain a whole pile of numbers, right? In fact, they are similar to a list in that they are something that you called an iterable, that you can that Python can go through one at a time, right? So in other words, each of these x's is going to be numbers in this range, right? Inside this loop, something that you already know, but so really, the first number it's going to be is 1, and it's going to go all the way up to 100, and then once it hits 101, right, it's not going to be 101 because this is the stop number. So we need to append each one of these. So we'll say listy_wisty.append, and we'll add x there, right? So what this is going to do now is for each of those numbers, it's going to add it to the list, and then we'll print that listy_wisty at the end. And we'll give this a try and see how it works. Now mine is actually complaining. List_wisty. There we go. I misspelled it. In any case, we'll see how this works. Okay, so you can see here, right, that we have numbers from 1 all the way to 100 in this list, right? It's a big list full of numbers. And that worked pretty well. So let's look at example 4. Example 4 says populate a list of variable size determined by the first input with input integer elements. So what this example is saying is let's create a list whose size we don't know, but it's determined by the first input, right? So if we want 10 numbers, then we're going to type 10 at the beginning, and then we type our 10 integers, and that's what our list will contain. So I want you to look at this solution. It's kind of cool, right? We have a blank list A, and then we go from I in range, and then look at this. I'm just putting the input right into the range object. What that's going to do is when this loop starts, it's not going to know how big to make this range until this input statement finishes. Okay, and then once that's done, then the loop starts and will go this many times, right? So let's give this a try. We'll just comment this guy out and do example 4, ex4, variable size list, right? Okay, and so we'll say A equals an empty list for I in range, and then int input. So make sure we have all our brackets there, which we do. And then we can append a.append, and we're going to put integers in, right? So we're just going to basically put in a new input each time this list runs, right? So we're appending our input, which is going straight in there as well. And then when we're done, we can print A. Let's see what we get here. So if we want 5, we'll type 5, and now we'll take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there we go, right? We got our list of 5 numbers. We'll just run that one more time with like a smaller list. We'll say 3, and then we've got 56, 41, 32, and there they are. Okay, let's look at example 5. This time it says populate a list of variable size with user input, which ends when the user enters 0. The list should include 0 as the last element. So that's something just to pay attention to, whether or not you're actually including the stop number. Okay, and in my assignments for this, right, it will be specific, and if it's not, you can always ask. All right, well, let's give this one a try. We'll comment out the last one. And this will be example 5. And ending input with a sentinel character. That's actually the name for this. When you type in a certain character to end your list, they call this a sentinel character. Kind of a funny name. But there it is. Okay, so for this one, again, we can start with a blank list, right? And what we need to do here is take input, right, and add that to the list. But we need to only do this while we don't have a certain input, right, which is 0, right? So for our while loop, which is what we need here, remember that we don't know how big this is going to be, right? This is not like the for loop before, where we have a set number of inputs that's determined at the beginning. This one's going to end when somebody types a 0, right? And so if that's the case, then we need to just have a while loop. So in order to get into our while loop, we'll set our default, right, element to something that's not a 0. Could even just be blank. Doesn't have to be 1 like I've indicated here. And then we can say while element is not equal to 0. We're going to add it, right? So we'll type element dot element equals input. Or you could even just tuck this input station right into the next one, a.append, like we did above. But I'll just show this and show this work on a separate line, just for clarity. Okay, and then we'll print A. So what this will do now, right, is as long as the input here, okay, is not a 0, it will append it. Actually, I might have this wrong in this little. Is this going to work? Let's just try this, right? Oh, yes, it will. Of course, we're including 0. So that should be fine. Yeah, it's going to append it, and then it will end, right? So let's try this. So we can type 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 0. Yeah, there we go. And we got all of our list elements, and the last one was a 0, right? Okay. Now these of course are all strings, right? So you could convert these in here if you needed to, if you wanted a list of integers or floats or strings. Just be sure to do that with your input as you work through your list and append the things that you want. Okay, so at this point you can pause the video and you can complete Replit assignments A and B for section 1.3. Okay, so next we're going to look at operators. So just like strings, we can expand and work with different lists by using operators, right? So if we go back to the terminal here for a minute, type Python, and let's type each of these in. You'll see what we'll get, right? If we add 1, 2, and 3, this list, and we add that to 4, 5, and 6. What it will actually do is just combine the lists into one list. Right? So these operators, if you remember, these work differently on arithmetic than they do with strings. Right? With strings, it concatenates the two strings, puts them together. Well, it's very similar with lists. Right? It joins them together to make one full list. So you can add lists to combine them. You can also multiply lists. Right? So if we take the list 1, 2, and we multiply it by 3, then we're just going to get a bigger list with 3 copies of that list all side by side, right? So we have a big list of the same 2 numbers over and over again. Okay? There's another really nice operator as well, which you have used already for strings, which is the in operator, right? So for lists, if you say x in my list, this checks to see if element x is present in my list. Okay, and if the not operator is used, then like not in my list, then really the statement returns true if the element is not in the list. Okay, so before we go into these examples, I'll just show you a couple quick examples over here, right? So if we have, if we say we were type 1 in, and then we have 1, 2. So what this is going to say is going to check if 1 is in this list, 1, 2. And of course that is true, right? It would be the same if we typed 2 in 1, 2. And we can set this 1, 2 to a variable. Why don't we do that? And then we'll have better access to it. We'll say 1, 2, 3. We'll set b to 1, 2, 3. And then we could say, you know, is 4 in b, right? Which is false because, you know, the list b now does not contain the element 4. Right? Or is the word high in B? And that's also false, right? But if we were to say 4 not in B, then we would get true, right? We would get true because we know that that is not in B. So, so you can use you can use this to create a condition to check if something's in a list or not in a list, and you should get an appropriate true or false Boolean value from using these. So this can be really handy when you're validating input, and I just want to show you a couple examples of how I do this. Feel free to type these out for your reference in the notes here. I'm not going to do that now, but save these because you can use these in your own program. So here, right, we're taking a message, right? We're taking a yes/no answer. Right, so what I've done here is set choice to something that's not y or n. That gets us into the loop because the condition is while choice not in y, comma, n, right? This list of yes or no, right? So we take the input choice, okay, and we display some message, whatever this message contains, convert it to lower this input, right? And so then it's going to come back up here, and if this input choice, okay, this variable is not y or is not n, then it's going to go again, right? And it's going to do the input again. So this will never end, okay? If this choice, if the input that's entered and stored in choice is not in this list, y or n, right? So this is pretty cool. Here's another way, right? If you want to select, if you want the user to select an option from 1 to 3, you can just you can give choice an invalid default, right? An invalid value to start gets you into the list, into the loop, because we know at the beginning choice is not in the list, and then the user types their input, right? here's the message, select an option from 1 to 3, and then it comes back, and if choice is not 1, 2, or 3, then it's going to go again, right? And so this again will never end unless the choice is in this list, okay, which you could then return. Now, these make really handy little things to put in functions, right? You can this one especially, if you want to just get a yes or no answer, right? You can return the choice, and if you've put it in a loop like this, then what you return is going to either be y or n, right? So that's kind of cool. All right, let's do a couple more things here. First, we're going to look at the length of a list. So there is a len function that you can use to determine how many elements are in a list, right? Literally, you just type len and then your list inside. So in this case, we set b to 1, 2, 3. So if we type len b, then we should get 3, right? So this is just a quick, easy way. If you need to know, for some reason, how many elements are in a list, you can calculate the length of it like this, okay? And there is one assignment where you'll have to do that for this section. Okay, so next let's look at how to access list elements and loop through them and process them. So for years, okay, there was a traditional way to do this, and we're going to learn this traditional way first, just so you can see it, and then we're going to look at the better Pythonic way to do it. So let's create a new example here, and we'll just call it accessing list elements old school. Okay, and so really, if we have this list of colors, which we'll type out, colors, which is equal to green, red, purple, and black. Then what we could do to get through this list is, well, we know that this one has index 0, this one 1, 2, 3, and so forth, right? So we could just refer to each, print each thing, for example, in the list one at a time by just literally printing the element at each index, right? And in order to do that, well, first of all, we need to know how long this is, right? This is going to be length 4 in this case. But we also need a number to put in, right, in order to actually print this, the right thing, the right element. So the index has to go from 0 to 3 in this case, right? So the range object works well for this because this will give us a collection of numbers from 0 to literally the length. In this case, we have 4. Hey, this is actually incorrect, I think, what you're seeing here, because we're going to have to subtract 1. Of course, the length is 4, but the index here is going to be 3. Oh, but we're not going to include this last one, right? So that should work fine, actually. So let's try this. We'll type 4 index in range. And now we want this to be the, right, again, we want this to be the stop value. So the length of colors is going to be 4. That means we're going to end at the 4th one, which would be the next one, which we don't have. So that's good. And then we'll print colors, and we'll just type index in here because that's our variable that's going to help us count our way through. Oops, we forgot our colon. So we'll put that up there. Let's run this and see if we get each color printed. There we go, right? Green, red, purple, black. So that worked pretty well. Just so you can see how this works, right? If we step through here, index is going to start at 0. So if we take first step, index is going to be 0, right? So colors contains, you can see here, those 4 things. If you just mouse over while the program is running in step mode, you can see it. And the length is 4. It's actually showing there as well. So, so colors 0 is going to be this one, which is green. Right, and if we step through, then index now is going to take, of course, it's going to take the value 1, and we're going to see red in the next one, right, and so forth, purple and black. And so there's the program working just as we thought. So the better way to do this, which is considered more Pythonic, which is a funny word in the Python world, saying, you know, that has to do with the style in which we code, right? So Python is designed for coding a certain style. So So Python gives a more powerful way to access your elements in the list. And so we're going to do this same thing. We're going to print all 4 of these, but we're going to use something similar to what we've done with letters in strings, right? So what we can do is use a for statement with a variable that takes the value of each element directly rather than this number, right? That's coming from the range object. Okay, so we can literally type the following. Let's call this one access list elements Pythonically. And to do this one, really what we can do is literally just this. We can type for item and create this variable in colors, right? So this will now take each thing in colors and contain that. And then we can just print that item. So we can literally just say for item in colors, which we've already defined right above, and say print item. So easy, right? So this will do the same thing, right? If we comment this out, and run it, we should see these same 4 colors. There they are, right? So item became green, and we'll step through this to see it. Right, so colors contains green, so item will start with a value of green, right? And then it will get printed. And then item will contain red, right? You can see it up here, changing, and just basically taking each value in the list one at a time. Right, so this is really nice and concise. You don't have to use this version, but I showed this to you just for reference as kind of a sense of history here, where we've come and where we've gone. And of course, using this method might be necessary in other coding languages as you go on in your coding career. So we're going to finish this lesson with a quick look at some conversion functions. Now, strings and lists are very similar, right? We already know that. You can iterate through both of them. They have indexes, and so there are some methods that you can use to convert them between each data type. So the first one we'll look at is split. Split converts a string to a list. So it is a string method. We attach it to the end of a string. And if you do that, then this will return a list, okay, of all the words in the string separated by spaces. Now, the space is the default character that split looks for in order to figure out how to divide up the string, right? So it divides it up around all the spaces. But you can optionally change that with whatever parameter you add to split, right? You don't have to put one in, but if you do, then it will change it, and we'll see that here. But first of all, let's just try this. We'll copy this, we'll paste this into our terminal. So we'll paste that. There we go, and now we'll print word list. So you can see now we have a list of those 4 words, right? Bullets, Dodge, Chuck, Norris, and that works great. We could also now try this one. Let's do number list, and we'll assign that. Assign this to number list, and this time it's going to split it around the commas, right? So each of these commas will divide up each list element, and we'll take a look at this, and we'll get to see the list that's made up of all those numbers that had commas around them. And it really doesn't matter what you have in here. You could have different letters, right? We could have, A, comma, B, comma, C, comma, D, comma, 2, comma, 3, or 3, comma, 4, comma, 5, right? And dot split, and then type in our comma as a string, and then we're going to get it broken up accordingly, right? So that's how to use the split method. Now, the join method does the opposite, the exact opposite of split. What it does is it joins all the elements, okay, of list, in this case, my list, all right, into a big string and places string X between each of them. So here's how it's used. So you type the X, the same X from up here, the thing that you want to go in between each of the list items. This, all right, and this is a string. Right, so if you want a space in between, then you have to put a space just like this at the beginning. Then you type dot join and put the list you want in as the parameter for the join method. Okay, so let's try a couple of these. So, right, if we have, let's say we have the list, A, right? We can copy and paste that in the terminal. Then we can type space dot join A, and we're going to get a string, one string containing all three of those things with spaces in between, right? Or if we want no spaces, we could use an empty string dot join A, and we would get red, green, blue with no spaces in between. So based on this, you can go ahead and complete Replit assignment 1.3 C to D, and that brings us to the end of our lesson.